Picture the most beautiful city in the world. Go on, close your eyes and build it. White marble, ancient columns half swallowed by the earth, a river the colour of old bronze cutting through the middle of it, churches on every hill, their domes pressing up into a sky so blue it doesn't seem real, fountains that have been running for 300 years without stopping, the smell of orange blossom on a warm evening, painters and poets and scholars filling the cafes, writing letters home saying, "I have arrived. I am finally here. Now keep all of that." And add the smell of 40,000 people with no running water in the middle of an August that reaches 38 degrees Celsius by mid-morning. Add the open sewers running down the middle of every street. Not just some streets, every street, draining directly into a river that also provides the city's drinking water. Add the stray dogs, the rubbish piles that have been growing since March, the butcher's scraps rotting in the gutter, the dead cat nobody's moved for a week. Add the mosquitoes. Here's the thing about Rome in the summer of 1837. It's full of people who came to find something. Beauty, work, God, a new life. Artists from France and Germany and England, here to sketch the ruins and write bad poetry about eternity. Pilgrims from everywhere, sleeping 10 to a room in hostels near the Vatican. Labourers from the countryside, from the mountains, from the little towns north and south, here because the harvest failed and the cities need workers and Rome always needs workers, always, endlessly, hungrily needs men willing to do the work that keeps beautiful things beautiful. And every single summer the city kills them. Not quickly, not with violence, not with a blade or a bullet, with a fever, la febbre romana, the Roman fever. They've been calling it that for centuries, long before anyone understood what it was, long before anyone connected it to the swamps in the Campagna surrounding the city, to the stagnant water, to the mosquitoes breeding in the standing pools left by the last spring flood. Long before all of that, people knew. If you sleep in Rome in summer, if you breathe the night air from the wrong direction, if you walk through the wrong low-lying neighbourhood at dusk, you might never walk out again. But nobody tells the labourers from Viterbo this. Or if they do, the labourers don't have any other options. So they come. Every year. And every year some of them end up in the Ospedale di Santo Spirito in Sassia, which is the oldest hospital in Rome, and possibly the oldest hospital in the Western world, and which by 1837 contains approximately 1,000 sick people, sleeping in beds designed to hold 600. I make these history stories, and I genuinely don't know if you're listening because you want to fall asleep, or because you find it oddly comforting to learn that life has always been this difficult for most of the people living it. Either way, welcome. Pull the blanket up. Get comfortable. Tonight we're going to Rome. Not the tourist Rome, not the marble and the fountains and the sunset over the Forum. We're going inside. Here we go. Your name is Emilio Carfora. You are 22 years old. You arrived in Rome in the middle of May with a letter of introduction, a bundle of clothes and 12 scudi. A sum that felt like wealth the morning you left Viterbo, and felt considerably less like wealth by the evening of the same day, when you discovered what a room in the Trastevere district costs. The letter was from your father's cousin, addressed to a stucco worker named Salvatore Conti, who has a workshop on the Via Giulia and a contract to restore the decorative plasterwork in a palazzo near the Farnese Gardens. Salvatore is a short, wide-shouldered man with plaster dust permanently embedded in the lines of his forehead and the knuckles of both hands. He looked at your letter, looked at you, looked at your hands. specifically your hands, and hired you on the spot. You've plastered before? My uncle has a house. I helped him repair the ceiling. Salvatore made a noise that might have been approval. Good. Be here at dawn. Don't be late. Don't drink before work. And don't eat the food from the cart on the Via del Pellegrino. That man hasn't changed his oil since February. That was your introduction to Rome. The work was hard and you were good at it. You mixed lime and sand and marble dust in the right proportions, climbed scaffolding 30 feet above floors with the confidence of someone who had always assumed he wouldn't fall, smoothed and shaped and recreated the ornamental borders and medallions that generations of wealth had deemed necessary to demonstrate just how wealthy they were. You learned the difference between a riccio and intonaco, between a first coat and a finish coat. You learned how to judge the dryness of a wall by pressing your palm flat against it, right hand, fingers spread, held for a slow count of 5, your hands cracked, your shoulders ached. At the end of each day, your lower back felt like someone had replaced your spine with a length of iron pipe. But you were being paid. You had a room, small, shared with a stonemason named Giacomo from Frosinone, who snored like a man constructing a building in his sleep, but a room. You ate. You sent money home. Not much, but some. Rome was extraordinary. You understood immediately why people wrote poems about it, even if the poems mostly missed the point. The poems talked about the ruins and the light and the sense of history pressing down on every cobblestone. What they didn't talk about was the woman on the Piazza Navona selling figs from a basket who could haggle in 3 dialects simultaneously. Or the way the evening light hit the ochre walls of Trastevere at about 6 in the evening in late May, turning everything the colour of honey. Or the sound of the city. Not the grand sound, not the church bells, though those were constant, but the low, dense, layered sound of 400,000 people living at close quarters, a sound that had its own texture, its own rhythm, its own warmth. You were not unhappy. That's important to say, because what comes next isn't the story of someone who was already in trouble. It's the story of someone who was doing fine. That's the thing about the fever. It doesn't care if you're doing fine. By July, Rome changes. Not slowly, not gradually. It changes the way a room changes when someone opens a furnace door. Suddenly, completely, unmistakably. The heat comes down from a cloudless sky and hits the stone streets and bounces back up and traps itself between the close-pressed buildings, and by 8 in the morning you are already sweating, and by noon the city has essentially surrendered. Shutters close. People retreat. The streets empty of everyone except the very poor who can't afford to rest, and the foreigners who are still stunned enough by the beauty of everything to ignore the fact that they're being slowly cooked. The smell changes too. Summer in Rome, 1837. The smell is something you need to understand properly, because it's not like any modern smell you've encountered. It is not one smell. It is 100 smells compressed into a single experience. The way a chord is multiple notes played simultaneously. There is the smell of the Tiber. The river in summer is low and slow, and what remains in the shallows is not water in any clean sense of the word. It's a brownish, organic suspension of everything the city has been throwing into it since the last rain, which was 3 weeks ago. The smell has a heaviness to it, a physical weight, as if the air near the riverbank is actually denser than air elsewhere. You learn to hold your breath when the wind comes from the river at midday. You learn to breathe through your mouth when it doesn't help. There is the smell of the streets, manure from the horses and donkeys and cattle that still provide most of the city's transport, mixing with the organic waste of several 100,000 people who use those same streets as their primary sanitation system, and over all of it, a sharp green-yellow note of vegetable rot from the market stalls, and underneath that something sweeter and more insidious that you learn over several weeks is the smell of the water in the low-lying streets of the Campo Marzio. Water that stands after the spring floods and never quite drains away completely. Water that breeds things. And there is your own smell, because there is no running water in your room, and the public fountain on your street works only in the mornings. And bathing is something that happens when you have the time and the basin and the inclination all coinciding, which in summer Rome is less often than you'd like. You get used to it. Everybody does. The city gets used to itself. But the mosquitoes, nobody gets used to the mosquitoes. They come in the evenings from the direction of the low ground, near the river from the direction of the Campagna beyond the walls where the Pontine marshes spread for miles, generating their invisible cargo of malevolent air. Mala aria, the doctors call it. Bad air. They believe this completely. They'll believe it for decades more. The connection between mosquitoes and fever hasn't been made yet. It won't be made definitively for another 60 years. And so you just scratch your arms in the morning and go to work and don't make the connection between the welts on your wrist and what's coming. Salvatore loses a labourer in late June. A man named Filippo, from somewhere in Abruzzo, gets the fever and goes home to his family. You don't know what happens to him. You take over his section of the scaffolding, the work continues, the heat gets worse. The first sign is the cold, which sounds strange, given what I just told you about the heat. You are working in 37 degrees. You're sweating through your shirt by 7 in the morning. You have been sleeping with the window open and still waking up damp. And one Thursday morning in the second week of August, you shiver. Not a full shiver, not the dramatic kind, not teeth chattering, not violent trembling, just a brief involuntary tightening of the muscles across your shoulders, as if a cold hand had pressed itself between your shoulder blades for a single second and then withdrawn. You're on the scaffold, 40 feet up, smoothing the last section of a painted ceiling border that Salvatore wants done by Friday. The plaster in your hand is the right consistency. Your arm is moving in the right rhythm. And then, cold, just for a second, gone. You stop. Look around as if the coldness came from somewhere external. The air around you is hot and still and smells like lime and old stone. There's nothing cold near you. There's nothing cold anywhere in Rome today. You go back to work. The second sign comes that afternoon. A headache. Not a bad one, just a presence behind your eyes. A slight pressure. The kind of thing you'd attribute to dehydration, or too much sun, or not enough sleep. You drink some water from the jug Salvatore keeps in the courtyard, tepid and slightly cloudy, and the headache retreats. You don't mention it to anyone. The third sign comes that evening, when you sit down to eat your supper, bread, a few olives, a piece of hard sheep's cheese, and find that you're not hungry. This is strange. You're always hungry. Physical labour in summer heat produces an appetite that borders on desperate, and you have been eating your meals with the concentrated focus of a man who considers eating a professional responsibility. Tonight, the bread looks wrong. The smell of the cheese seems too strong. You eat half of it and stop. Giacomo notices. You all right? Tired, you say. You're always tired. More than usual. He shrugs. Goes back to eating. Men in your position are always tired. That's just the condition. You sleep badly that night. Not because of the heat, which is what you assume, not because of Giacomo's snoring, which you've long since learned to sleep through. You sleep badly because your body is doing something. Even in sleep you can feel it. A restlessness in your limbs, a faint buzzing quality to the air around you, as if you're running a very slight fever. Not bad enough to register, not bad enough to worry about, just wrong enough that you notice. The fourth day, you wake up cold, and this time 'tis not a brief shiver. This is the cold of the bottom of a well, a cold that comes from inside you and radiates outward, a cold so complete and specific that you lie there in the August heat under a thin sheet and shake. You pull the sheet tighter. It doesn't help. Nothing in the room is cold. The air coming through the window is warm. Giacomo is already up and gone. The room has been warming since sunrise. But your body doesn't know this. Your body is convinced it is the middle of January. Your teeth are chattering. Actual chattering. Clacking together every few seconds with a hollow, uncontrolled sound. This lasts 40 minutes, maybe 45. Then it stops. Then you are warm. Then you are burning. By the time you make it to the workshop, you're not well and everyone can see it. The fever has come fully now. First the cold, then the heat, then the sweating, then a few hours of deceptive calm when you feel almost human again. Then it starts over. Right now you're in the heat phase. Your skin is dry and radiating warmth like a bread oven. Your head feels like someone has packed it with wet wool. The scaffolding, 30 feet of wooden planks and iron brackets that you've climbed every morning for 3 months without giving it a thought, looks this morning like a significant obstacle. Salvatore takes one look at you. You've got the fever. I'm fine. You're not fine. Your eyes look like 2 holes in a brick wall. Sit down. You sit. The courtyard ground is blessedly cool through the fabric of your trousers. How long? Salvatore asks. Start this morning. Cold, then. Not today. How long have you been sick? You think about the shiver on the scaffold, the headache, the untouched cheese. 4 days, maybe 5. Salvatore makes a sound in his throat that isn't quite words. He's seen this before. Of course he has. He's been working in Rome for 20 years. Every summer he loses someone to the fever. Last year it was a boy from Tivoli, 18 years old. The year before, a man with 3 children in Latina. They come to Rome looking for work. The city takes what it wants. He calls his wife. His wife brings a cloth soaked in vinegar and puts it on your forehead, which is something people do in 1837 because it's always been done and because there isn't much else. The vinegar is sharp and cool and makes the inside of your nose tingle with something almost medicinal. Can you work? Salvatore asks. You genuinely believe you can. You say yes. 20 minutes later, on the scaffold, your hands stop cooperating. They know something your brain doesn't yet admit, that whatever is happening inside your body is not minor, is not tiredness, is not going to be solved by drinking more water. Your hands shake when you pick up the trowel. The plaster slides off the blade instead of onto the wall. You have to grip the scaffold railing to stay upright, your knuckles white against the iron. From below, Salvatore watches. You climb down. That afternoon, he sends for the barber surgeon on the Via dei Banchi Vecchi. Not a doctor. Doctors cost money that neither of you has. But a barber surgeon, which in 1837 means a man with some medical training, some practical experience, and a toolkit that includes lancets. The barber surgeon comes. He's a small, precise man named Moretti, who smells of tobacco and something herbal you can't identify. He takes your pulse, looks at your eyes, takes your temperature by pressing the back of his hand against your forehead, asks you to describe the pattern of the cold and the heat. Quartan, he says. When he says it, it's the way a man names something he's seen 100 times, not alarmed, not sympathetic, just factual. Roman fever, classic presentation. He writes something in a small book. What do I do? You ask. Rest. The bark, cinchona bark, 3 grains, twice daily, plenty of water. He looks at the room, at the cracked basin, the single window, the straw mattress. Can you go home? Home is 2 days' travel north. Home is your parents' house, which has a bed, and your mother, and no chance of earning any money until you recover and can come back. No, you say. Moretti writes down where to get cinchona bark and what it costs. It costs more than you have. He leaves. You lie on the mattress. The fever cycles through you again. Cold, heat, sweating, calm, with the mechanical indifference of a clock. Every 8 hours the sequence repeats. By the second day you can't eat. Not. Won't. Can't. The sight of food makes your stomach clench. Giacomo brings you water from the fountain and watches you drink it with the careful attention of a man who is not sure what to do, but has decided that doing something is better than doing nothing. By the 3rd day, the deceptive calm periods, the windows when you feel almost normal, start to shrink. They were 4 hours long, now they're 3, now 2. By the 5th day, Salvatore comes to the room. He stands in the doorway, looking at you, doing the calculation that everyone does when looking at a sick man who has nobody to take care of him and no money for treatment. He's not a bad man. He's a man who has a workshop to run and mouths to feed and a business that requires healthy workers. I can't keep you, he says. I need the bed. It's your bed. You pay for it out of wages. But you understand what he means. The room belongs to his household. If you're going to lie in it for weeks, not working, not paying. I know, you say. He puts a few coins on the mattress beside you. More than he needed to. Less than you need. The brothers at Santo Spirito will take you, he says. Tell them you have the quartan. Show them the barber's note. They'll take you. Santo Spirito. Even lying flat on your back with a fever that cycles like a tide, you know what Santo Spirito means. Every labourer in Rome knows. It's the hospital on the south bank of the Tiber, the one that's been there since the 8th century, the one that takes everyone. The poor, the destitute, the pilgrims, the dying, the people who have nobody else. The people who have nobody else. You stare at the ceiling. Giacomo has been quiet in the corner, pretending to do something with his boots. Now he looks up. I'll take you, he says. The morning Giacomo takes you to the hospital is the 16th of August. You know this because you've been counting the fever cycles, and because you heard someone on the street below your window say the date that night before, the 16th of August, the feast of something or other. Rome is always in the middle of some feast. The bells have been ringing since dawn. Getting dressed takes longer than it should. Your hands, which 3 weeks ago were steady and practiced enough to smooth intonaco on a ceiling without spilling a drop, now button your shirt with the slow determination of someone learning to do it for the first time. Your fingers seem slightly too large. The buttons seem slightly too small. The world has that quality it gets in certain kinds of sickness. Slightly too real in some ways and slightly too unreal in others. The colours of things either too vivid or too washed out. No middle ground. You can walk. That's something. Some people arrive at Santo Spirito in a cart carried. You are going to walk. The route from Trastevere to Santo Spirito is not long, maybe 15 minutes in normal conditions through the streets that follow the bend of the Tiber. You've done it before on Sunday afternoons, just wandering. Today it takes 40 minutes. You stop 4 times. Once because the light is too bright and you need to stand in the shade of a doorway until your eyes adjust. Once because your legs simply stop and you have to grip a wall and wait. Once because a wave of nausea passes through you so completely that you have to breathe through your mouth and count to 20 while Giacomo stands beside you saying nothing, which is exactly the right thing to do. The 4th stop is because you see the hospital and your body, without consulting you, simply stops walking. The Ospedale di Santo Spirito in Sassia. From the outside, and this is the thing about this place that you'll remember long afterward, that will stay with you clearer than almost anything else about that summer. From the outside, it's beautiful. The facade facing the Via dei Penitenzieri is long and pale and harmonious, the kind of elegant 15th century building that Rome does without seeming to try. The carved entrance portal, the long colonnade, the octagonal tower of the Spezieria rising above the roofline, pale stone against a sky that is still, despite everything, an unreasonable shade of blue. It was built in its current form in the late 15th century under Pope Sixtus IV, though the hospital itself has been on this site since the year 727 AD, over 1,000 years on this same bend of the Tiber, tending the sick and the dying. Think about that for a moment. Not an abstraction, a real span of time. Your grandfather's 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 grandfather was not born yet when the first monk started receiving patients here. The Normans hadn't yet arrived in England. The Vikings were still raiding, and the hospital was already here. You stand on the street and look at it. It doesn't look like a place to be afraid of. It looks like exactly what it is. An old, serious, beautiful building that has been absorbing the suffering of the city for longer than anyone can fully imagine. Then the wind shifts, bringing air from the river, and you smell what's inside. The admissions process at Santo Spirito in 1837 takes approximately 2 hours. You understand why, rationally. This is a charitable hospital, a fabriceria, funded by papal and private charity, taking in the sick poor of Rome and the surrounding territories at no cost. The demand exceeds the supply. It always exceeds the supply. The admission staff, a clerk in a black coat and a senior brother in the white habit of the Order of the Holy Spirit, the double red cross on his breast, are not being slow out of indifference. They are slow because there are 12 people ahead of you in the corridor when you arrive, and 4 more come while you're waiting. You sit on a wooden bench in the corridor and wait. The corridor itself is wide and vaulted. The ceiling high enough to feel institutional, the floor paved in stone worn smooth by centuries of feet. There are niches in the wall where lamps burn. The smell of the place accumulates the longer you sit in it. Lie soap, which is strong, vinegar, which the brothers use as a disinfectant and which hangs in the air like a sharp ghost. And under both of those, something organic and ancient. The smell of a building that has been absorbing human illness for over 1,000 years. A smell that no amount of cleaning will ever fully lift. It's not a bad smell exactly. It's not the smell of neglect. It's the smell of effort, of people trying very hard with the tools available to them to keep this place bearable. The other patients on the bench, there's a young woman with a child who isn't moving in the way a sleeping child moves, lying too still against her chest. an old man who seems to be in a different conversation with reality, mumbling something directed at the middle distance. Two men about your age who came together and speak to each other in a dialect you half recognise as somewhere south, possibly Calabrese. Woman in pilgrim's clothes whose feet, visible beneath her dress, are the feet of someone who has been walking for weeks. All of them here for the same reason, all of them out of options. When the clerk finally reaches you, you hand him the barber's note and tell him your name and where you're from and what you do. He writes it down in a large ledger in handwriting that is precise and unhurried. The senior brother takes your pulse and asks you to stick out your tongue and nods when you describe the cycling pattern. Quarton, he says, the same word, the same neutral tone. Ward 6. The brother will take you. You follow the brother, a young man, 20 or so in his white habit, through a doorway, down a corridor, through another doorway, and into the hospital itself. The smell reaches you before the sound, and the sound reaches you before the sight. Smell first, a wall of it, the organic density of bodies, warm bodies, sick bodies, bodies that haven't been washed in days, bodies, doing all the things that bodies do when they're fighting infection, concentrated and contained in a stone room that, despite its height, despite its windows, is working very hard not to smell the way it smells. Under everything else, beneath the lye and the vinegar, the smell of fever itself, sweet, slightly rotten, the smell of the body burning itself to keep something out. It's not the smell of death exactly, it's the smell of the body fighting not to die. Sound second, voices but not many and not loud. The dominant note is lower, coughing, a constant background of coughing in different registers, dry coughs and wet coughs, rhythmic and sudden, like musicians in an orchestra who've each lost the score and are playing separately. Beneath that, breathing, the specific laboured breathing of fever, the kind that audibly costs more than normal breathing. And beneath that, a murmuring. People talking to each other, to themselves, to nobody. Prayers probably, some of it, just words, some of it. Sight last. A long room. Not the elegant long room of the building's exterior, this is a working room. A room that has been modified and crammed with decades of necessity. The original design allowed for single beds in neat rows with space between them. The reality of 1837 is beds pushed to within arm's reach of each other, and in some cases, in many cases, two patients sharing a single bed. Not two patients of comparable size who might share comfortably, but two patients placed there because the hospital has run out of beds, and the choice is two patients to a bed, or one patient to a bed, and someone else dying in the street. The beds are wooden frames with straw mattresses covered in coarse linen that is white, in the places where it has been recently washed, and yellowish-grey in the places where it hasn't. Above each bed, a small plaque with a saint's name. This is the naming system, how they track who is where. You're assigned to a bed under the name of Sant'Agostino. Sant'Agostino is already occupied. The man in the bed is older than you, maybe 40, maybe more. It's hard to tell because sickness has a way of making the age of a face uncertain. And he's sleeping with the effortful stillness of someone in the cold phase of a fever cycle. His face is pale beneath the Roman tan. His breath comes in the measured cadence of someone whose body is doing the minimum necessary to sustain life, and not a thing more. The brother shows you the narrow slice of mattress available on the right side of the bed. I have to share, you say, not complaining, just confirming. Most do, the brother says. He's already moving toward the next task. You sit on the edge of the bed and look at the room. There are perhaps 60 beds in here, 60 beds, and approximately 90 men, because not every bed has 2 occupants, but most of them do. The ceiling is high and vaulted. Proper hospital design, good ventilation, 15 feet of air above every patient. Long windows on one side of the room let in the white Roman light, though the shutters are half closed against the heat. Near the far end, a wooden crucifix hangs on the wall, nearly 2 meters tall, the paint worn smooth by whatever has been touched or thrown at it over the centuries. There are nuns here. Figures in grey and white moving between beds with the systematic efficiency of people who have long since made peace with what they're doing. They're the daughters of charity, a French order brought to Rome, trained specifically for this work. They don't flinch. They move between the beds with bowls of water and strips of linen and small bottles of things you can't identify, and they speak in low, practical voices to the men they're tending, and they don't look at the room the way you're looking at it, with something between awe and horror. They look at it the way Salvatore looks at a wall that needed replastering, as a job, specific, manageable. Today's task. A nun comes to you within a few minutes of your arrival. She's perhaps 30, with a face that has the quality of perpetual composure. Not peace exactly, but composure. The face of someone who has deliberately built a kind of steadiness over whatever they felt before. She takes your temperature by pressing the back of her hand to your forehead, matter of fact as a carpenter checking a joint, and asks you the same questions the clerk asked. Have you eaten today? No. We'll bring soup at midday. You need to drink. There is water on the table there. She points to a table with ceramic pitchers along the wall. Don't drink from the river. Don't drink from anything you didn't get from that table. This instruction, don't drink from the river, is being given to you in a room full of men who are mostly sick from something in the water supply, though the connection between contaminated water and disease hasn't been made yet. In 1837, the dominant theory is still miasma, bad air. The water is secondary. The nun doesn't know this is wrong. Nobody in this room knows this is wrong. They are doing their best with the theory they have. You drink the water from the pitcher. It tastes of nothing in particular. You hope that means it's safe. You lie down on your slice of the mattress, on your side facing the room. The man near the other half of the bed doesn't stir. From somewhere to your left, a man is coughing, a wet, grinding cough that sounds architectural, like something structural is giving way. From somewhere to your right, an argument in low voices, two patients disagreeing about something you can't quite make out. From the direction of the windows, birds, actual birds, sparrows probably, their chatter completely indifferent to everything happening beneath them. The fever moves through its cycle. The sweating phase is starting. You can feel it beginning, first in your scalp, then between your shoulder blades, then everywhere at once, your body deciding it will attempt to resolve this crisis through sheer hydraulic volume. The sheets beneath you, already faintly damp from whoever slept here before you, grow damp in a new way. You stare at the vault of the ceiling above you. This is where you are now. His name is Teodoro Facino. He's from Turin originally, though he's lived in Rome for 15 years, working in various capacities around the print shops near the Campo dei Fiori. You learn this in installments over the first 2 days, in the periods when both of you are in the calm phase simultaneously, those strange windows when the fever retreats, and you feel almost like a person again when conversation becomes possible. Teodoro is 51 years old. He has the quartan fever, same as you, but he's been in the ward for 3 weeks already, which tells you something about either the severity of his case or his luck or both. He's printer's compositor by trade. One of the men who sets the type arranges the individual metal letters in their frames to form words and sentences and pages. He has the specific physical characteristics of a man who has spent decades bent over type cases in poorly lit rooms. A slight forward curvature to the spine, eyes that have learned to focus at precisely 14 inches with the precision of surveying instruments. His hands are stained with ink in a way that laundering doesn't fully remove, not just under the nails, but in the fine lines of the knuckles, in the whorls of the fingertips, as if the ink has simply decided to become part of him. He's not a well man in any general sense. 3 weeks of fever and inadequate nutrition have stripped weight from his frame that he probably didn't have to spare. But he's present in a way that some of the other patients in the ward aren't. He watches things. He knows the names of the brothers and the nuns and most of the other patients within earshot. He knows which physician comes on which day and what each physician tends to do. There are 3 doctors, he tells you, on the second evening. The fever is in its calm phase for both of you, and you're lying side by side in the dimming light, not quite looking at each other, speaking toward the ceiling. 3 doctors for this ward, 3 doctors for the whole hospital. The chief physician comes on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He's good. Old, but good. He actually asks questions before he decides what to do. A pause. The young one comes Monday and Wednesday and Friday. He learned medicine from books more than from patients, you can tell. He's quiet for a moment. He bleeds people a lot. Does it help? Another pause. No, Teodoro says. Bloodletting, phlebotomia, is still standard practice in 1837. Not universal, not without its critics, but still widely practiced, especially in Italian hospitals where the older school of medicine maintains its hold. The theory is that fever is caused by an excess of blood or an imbalance of humours, and removing some blood corrects the imbalance. The practice is a steel lancet in the arm, a basin, 10 to 20 ounces removed depending on the practitioner's judgment, after which the patient is typically weaker, lighter, paler, which the practitioners interpret as improvement. It is not improvement. The third doctor, you ask. Woman. You look at him. Woman, he repeats. Come in from France, they say, though I haven't had the chance to speak French with her. She treats mostly the women's ward, but she comes to this ward when... He pauses. When the others are not available. She gives quinine, only one who gives it consistently. Quinine is expensive. She brings her own supply, from somewhere. I don't know the arrangement. He shifts slightly in the bed. She's good. Better than the young one. You want her to see you, not him. File that information. In the days ahead, this will matter. The hospital runs on schedule. This is the thing that surprises you most in the first days. The degree to which the chaos of the ward is organised by routine. Dawn, the sound of the bell. The ward comes alive or comes to such animation as it can manage. Brothers moving in with fresh water for the pitchers. A nun going from bed to bed, checking on those who seemed most ill the night before. The smell of bread from somewhere. Faint but real, which is either today's breakfast being prepared or simply the smell of bread drifting from some bakery nearby, carried on air that is not yet fully hot. Breakfast is bread and a thin soup, brodo, which is made from whatever bones and vegetable scraps are available, and which is on good days warm and sustaining, and on bad days warm and not much else. You receive it in a ceramic bowl brought by a young lay brother with a face so kind and unremarkable that you'll have trouble remembering it afterward. He gives you the bowl, moves on, comes back for it. No conversation, just the bowl. You make yourself eat. The fevered body has no appetite, which is one of the cruelties of the disease. You need nourishment most when you want it least. The bread is heavy and slightly stale. The soup is thin enough that you can see the bottom of the bowl through it. You eat it anyway. Every mouthful is a decision. Morning. The physicians come. And when I say physicians come, I need you to understand what that means in this ward in 1837. This isn't a modern hospital with a consulting team doing rounds with charts and labs and overnight data. This is one physician walking briskly between beds, asking brief questions, making decisions with the confidence and the limitations of a man operating with incomplete theory. Today is Monday. The young doctor, Ferretti, arrives with 2 medical students in identical dark coats and identical expressions as controlled interest. The students hold notebooks. Ferretti holds the authority of his position and his certainty. You see him bleed 3 men on your first Monday. The first man, in the bed nearest the window, offers his arm without argument. This has happened before, clearly. Ferretti makes a small, precise incision just below the elbow, holds the basin, watches the blood fall. The sound of it is wrong in the way that bodily sounds are always wrong when you hear them outside the body, a small wet sound, regular, patient. 20 minutes, 20 ounces or so. The man afterward is visibly paler, his breathing more shallow, his eyes hazier. Ferretti makes a note, moves on. The second man protests. He's younger, maybe 18, from somewhere in the countryside. You can hear it in his accent. He pulls his arm back and shakes his head. There's a brief exchange. Ferretti speaking with the authority of his coat and his notebook, the young man speaking with the authority of someone who doesn't want to be cut. It ends with the young man giving his arm. Afterward he lies very still, staring at the ceiling, and you see him quietly crying, the tears running sideways across his temples into his hair. Not from pain, not exactly, from something more complicated than pain. The third man doesn't notice. He's in the deep phase of the fever and he's past noticing. Ferretti doesn't bleed you. When he gets to your bed, he looks at you, looks specifically at your colour, your eyes, the quality of your skin, and asks you to describe the cycle. He listens. He writes something down. He moves on without making the incision. You ask Teodoro about this later. He bled me the first week, Teodoro says. I must have looked worse than you do. Either that or you look bad enough that he's reconsidered. This is Teodoro's humour, dry, precise, delivered without the faintest variation in his expression. Midday, more soup, a cup of weak wine, diluted with water. This isn't luxury. Wine is believed to have antiseptic properties, and in a city where the water supply is genuinely dangerous, diluted wine is sometimes safer to drink than plain water. Nobody here knows the science of it. They know the observation. People who drink the wine seem to do slightly better than people who only drink the water. They're right, for the wrong reasons. Afternoon. The long hours. The ward settles into its specific afternoon quality. Heat thickened by bodies and breath. Light coming in sideways through the half-shuttered windows and moving slowly across the floor as the hours pass. The general low sound of the ward, coughing, murmuring, occasional sudden cries that subside as quickly as they began, continues unchanged. It has a texture now, this sound, A weave you're beginning to recognize the individual threads of. You sleep when the fever allows, you lie awake when it doesn't. When you're awake and not in the worst of it, you watch the room. By the fourth day, you know most of the faces within your line of sight. To your left, a man the brothers call simply Vincenzo. He's very old, 70 at least, and he arrived 3 days before you, and speaks very little. When he does speak, he uses a form of Romanesco so old and thick that you can follow perhaps one word in 5. He has an infection in his left leg, you understand, something that has gone septic, and it has gone high enough that the doctors have discussed, in voices not quite low enough, the possibility of amputation. Every time the physician approaches his bed, Vincenzo watches with the composed attention of a man who has decided that whatever happens, he has already seen enough of the world to face it without flinching. There is something in this composure that you find yourself returning to in the long afternoon hours, the complete absence of complaint, the way Vincenzo accepts the broth and the examination and the pain. You can see the pain. When the nun changes the dressing on his leg, his jaw tightens and his hands grip the sides of the mattress, and his knuckles go white, but he makes no sound. With a stillness that seems less like resignation and more like a decision he made some time ago, long before this ward, and has not seen reason to revisit. To your right, 2 brothers, Pietro and Luca Salvemini from Cosenza. They arrive together, are sick together, and seem to be conducting a quiet negotiation with their illness, as if it's something they might be able to argue out of existence. Pietro is stronger. He sits up, eats, talks. Luca sleeps most of the day and wakes up coughing. They have a private arrangement between them that you don't know the terms of, but can see the operation of. Pietro does something for Luca, and Luca responds with something, and there's a structure to their shared survival that is both practical and deeply tender, the way that brothers who have been through difficulty together sometimes are. Pietro's hands, when he smooths the blanket over his younger brother, are entirely matter-of-fact, as if this is normal, as if this is just what you do. Across the ward, a German artist. You know he's an artist because the nun mentioned it, and you know he's German because of the specific quality of his Roman Italian, grammatically impeccable, phonetically from somewhere very far north. His name is Friedrich, first name or last, you're not sure, and he's been here 2 weeks with some form of intestinal fever that has stripped everything from him, left him with the hollow, clean-boned look of someone who has been very hungry for a very long time. He has a small sketchbook in the bed beside him. He hasn't opened it in days. You watch his hands sometimes, the careful hands of someone who draws for a living, lying still on the blanket with the quality of objects waiting to be useful again. And there is the priest, Father Damaso, the hospital chaplain, somewhere between 50 and ancient, who comes every morning and evening to pray with the patients. He is not the kind of priest who performs, not the kind who explains. He's the kind that simply stays. He sits with the dying. He holds their hands. He says the words that are asked of him. He does. This without drama and without apparent exhaustion, which means either he has made some profound peace with death, or that he has made some other accommodation with it, some private arrangement of his own. You don't ask him which. Night in the fever ward is its own country. The oil lamps in the corridor outside cast a glow through the open door. The ward itself exists in partial visibility. Shapes in beds, the height of linen, the height of the nun's habit when one of them passes through on the hour. The ceiling vaults are invisible in the darkness. The ward extends into shadow. The sounds at night are different from the sounds in the day. The coughing is still constant. More constant, maybe, because whatever the bodies are doing in sleep isn't quieting the irritated airways. But the human sounds, the voices and arguments and prayers, have mostly subsided. What remains are the sounds of pure physical process, breathing laboured and regular, the specific sound of a body in the cold, phase, a fine, continuous vibration, like a saw on metal but quieter, more intimate, the sound of a person shaking against their own will, and once or twice each night, a sound that you have to learn to recognise and then learn to sleep through, the sound of someone dying. It doesn't always sound the way you'd expect. You had a conception of dying as a dramatic event, ragged breathing, violent struggle, some specific terminal moment. What you find is more various than that. Some deaths are exactly what you expected, but many are quieter, a change in the quality of the breathing, a period of effort, shallow and fast, and then an absence, the absence of that particular pattern of breath from the ward's nightly texture. The brother who does the night rounds notices. He goes to the bed, does something invisible in the dark. Within 20 minutes, 2 men come with a stretcher. The body leaves by a side door you can only hear, not see. A soft wheeling sound, the weight of a human body, in motion, receding. Nobody in the ward says anything. The other patients are asleep, or pretending to be, or simply past reacting to this particular event. By morning, the bed is empty. By the afternoon admission session, it usually has someone new in it. On the first night, this happens once. On the third night, twice. You lie awake and count, and you're ashamed of counting, and you count anyway, because counting feels like the only thing you can do with this information. She comes on Thursday afternoon, when Ferretti is not in the ward. You've been in the hospital 5 days by then. The fever has not improved. If anything, the cycles have become more pronounced. Teodoro says this sometimes happens in the second week, that the fever establishes its full intensity before it begins, if it begins, to retreat. She arrives with a black leather bag that she sets on the small table between beds. She's shorter than you expected, though you don't know why you had an expectation, and she moves with an efficiency that is somehow different from Ferretti's efficiency, less like authority, more like competence. Her Italian is good, very good, but the French vowels are there underneath, not quite erased. She examines Teodoro first. She takes his pulse with 2 fingers and her full attention. Not the brief grip and release that Ferretti does. She looks at his tongue, presses her fingers gently into his abdomen in several places, asks him specifically about the timing of the cycles. Her expression doesn't change as she does this, but the quality of her attention does. It narrows, focuses, the way a magnifying glass focuses light. Then she opens the black bag. Quinine. She takes out a small paper packet and unfolds it, and inside is a dark powdery substance, the ground bark of the cinchona tree, the treatment that's been known in Europe for nearly 2 centuries. The bark contains something that specifically attacks the malarial parasite, though no one in 1837 knows the word parasite or could explain the mechanism. They know it works. They've been calling it Jesuits' bark since the Jesuits brought it from Peru in the 1630s, and they know that for intermittent fevers, malarial fevers, it does something that other treatments don't. She mixes a dose in a cup of water, stirs it, hands it to Teodoro. He drinks it without comment. with the resigned expression of a man who knows exactly what quinine tastes like. It tastes bitter. Enormously, assertively bitter, the way very few things in nature taste. A bitterness that seems to want to apologize to your entire mouth for what it's doing, but has decided to do it anyway. Teodoro's expression, as he drinks it, does not improve. Then she comes to you. Same examination, pulse, tongue, abdomen. Her hands are cool, which registers through the fever's warmth as remarkable. She asks you the same questions. She listens to your description of the cycles with the same quality of focused attention, and then she's quiet for a moment, not writing, not moving, just thinking. 5 days, she says. And before you arrived here? 5 days before that, maybe 6. 11 days total. She looks at you. You're young and otherwise healthy. That's good. But you need quinine and you've been going without. Ferretti. Ferretti prefers bark-free management for mild presentations. Her tone doesn't rise or fall, she's stating a fact. I disagree with this philosophy. She mixes you a dose. It is, as Teodoro's expression promised, extremely bitter. But within 2 hours, 2 hours exactly, you count them, you feel something change. Not dramatically, not the theatrical recovery you'd imagined, but the fever's cycle, which has been a metronome of misery for 11 days, seems to lose some of its precision. The cold phase doesn't cut as deep. The hot phase doesn't climb as high. It's as if someone has turned a dial very slightly in the right direction. Not better, but less bad. You ask the nun her name. The nun says it's the physician's habit not to give her name in the ward. The patients call her simply La Française, she says, the Frenchwoman. Later, much later, after you've left the hospital, you'll wish you'd pushed harder to find out her name, to thank her properly, to know who it was, specifically, who brought quinine and turned the dial. But at the time, all you know is that something changed. That's enough. On the 6th day, which is a Ferretti day, the young doctor gives a lecture. This is apparently a regular occurrence. Once a week or so, Ferretti gathers the 2 medical students who accompany him on rounds and conducts what amounts to a teaching exercise while standing in the middle of the ward. The patients in the beds, the living examples, the case studies, mostly stare at the ceiling and wait for it to be over. You lie there and listen. The malarial fever, according to Ferretti, is caused by miasma, the exhalation of the low marshy ground around Rome, the vapours of the Tiber in summer. The treatment should be rest, careful diet, and bloodletting to balance the humours, supplemented in appropriate cases by cinchona bark, though Ferretti notes that the bark has its own risks and shouldn't be given routinely. You think about La Française and her black bag. You say nothing. Ferretti describes the history of the fever in Rome. He describes how Cicero wrote of the fevers of the Pontine marshes, how the progressive spread of malarial zones around the city contributed to the depopulation of the ancient Campagna Romana, that vast empty plain you crossed coming south from Viterbo. You were on the road for 2 days, 2 days of empty green fields broken only by the arched shadows of ancient aqueducts, the occasional stone farmhouse abandoned to the weather, fields that were once farmed, that once fed Rome, now empty. Because the fever takes anyone who stays year-round. The only people who live there now are the Baturi, the cattle herders, on horseback, moving with the herds, never staying in one place long enough for the marsh air to find them. The ancient Romans didn't understand what was happening. They felt the city gradually emptied of its agricultural hinterland. They built temples to fever, actual temples. Febris was a goddess or a demon, or something in between. And she had shrines in Rome where people left offerings asking not to be sick, and they kept getting sick. 1,837 years later, in this ward, the same thing is still happening, because nobody has yet looked at a mosquito under a microscope, because that discovery is 60 years away. You're lying in a bed, sick with a disease no one in this room fully understands, being treated by a physician whose best theory is incorrect, in a hospital doing its absolute maximum with the knowledge available to it. This is what it means to live before the discovery of things, not ignorance, not stupidity, just the hard wall of what isn't known yet. The wall everyone in history has lived against. The wall you can't see until someone somewhere finds the door. The night of the 8th day. You know it's the 8th day because you have been counting. The 8th night is different. You know it's different because Teodoro wakes up. Teodoro, who has the veteran's habit of sleeping in exactly the spaces available, who can sleep through coughing, through prayers, through the removal of bodies in the dark, Teodoro opens his eyes at some hour past midnight and turns his head toward you and says very quietly, "Breathe," which is when you realize you haven't been. Or rather, you have been breathing, but the breathing has become something you're managing consciously, something you have to think about and maintain through deliberate effort. The automatic quality has gone out of it, the way it goes out of walking when you think too hard about what your legs are doing. The fever has gone very high. You know this from the quality of the heat, which is no longer just the warmth of a sick body, but something that seems to have abandoned proportion, that has the desperate, totalizing character of a fire in a closed room. Your shirt is soaked. The sheets are soaked. The straw of the mattress beneath you is damp, and the dampness is spread out from your body in a slow continent. Your heart is doing something strange, not painful, just rapid and slightly irregular, with pauses that seem longer than they should be before the next beat comes, as if it's counting between. Teodoro sits up. "Hey," he says, quietly. The night ward is dark. "I'm all right," you say, which is not true. He gets out of bed, slowly, carefully, his own legs uncertain, and goes to the corridor. You hear the low exchange of voices, then footsteps. The night brother comes to the bed. He presses his hand to your forehead, takes your wrist. He says a word under his breath that might be a prayer or might be a profanity or might be both, in the way that very specific situations sometimes require a word that covers multiple theological categories simultaneously. He goes away. 2 minutes, maybe 3. He comes back with La Francaise. She is in a different dress than she wears during the day rounds, and her hair is different, and the oil lamp she carries makes shadows on her face that are different from the daylight shadows. She was asleep. She's not asleep anymore. She's made this transition with speed and efficiency and no visible resentment, which is either professional discipline or a kind of courage, or both. She sets the lamp on the bedside table. She examines you, pulse, breathing, temperature, pupils. "You're in crisis," she says, not alarmed, just naming it. What does that mean? It means the fever has peaked. Now either it breaks or... She stops. Usually it breaks. Usually. She opens the black bag, she carries it even at night, takes out the quinine, mixes it stronger than usual, makes you sit up to drink it. Sitting up is an event. Your body has an opinion about sitting up that it expresses by making everything tilt. Teodoro puts a hand on your shoulder from behind, warm and steady, keeping you upright. You drink the quinine. The bitterness this time seems almost welcome. It tastes like effort, like the body being helped from outside because it can no longer help itself from within. She has you lie back down. She soaks a cloth in water, cold water from the night pitcher, genuinely cold at this hour, and puts it on your forehead and on your wrists and on the back of your neck. The cold is extraordinary. It feels like being given something back, like a door opening briefly onto a cool October morning in the middle of August. "I'm going to stay," she says. She pulls the small stool beside the bed and sits down. The lamp burns. Teodoro lies down again but keeps his hand on the mattress between you, not touching you, just there. The ward breathes around you. From across the room, someone is praying in Latin very quietly, the words worn smooth by repetition. You don't remember all of the next 3 hours. Memory in high fever is episodic, fractured. But you remember fragments. The lamp's flame absolutely still, because there's no draught in the ward at this hour. The air has thickened and settled into something almost solid. La Francese's voice, not praying, just talking in a low, continuous sound, sometimes in French, sometimes in Italian, sometimes in something else. Not to you, not to anyone, just maintaining a thread of human sound in the dark. The way you might keep a candle burning, not because you need the light, but because you need the flame. The coughing from across the ward still constant. Someone's body still fighting, still doing the work it needs to do regardless of the hour. The sound of the river. You can hear it on quiet nights through the window. The Tiber running below, the same river that has been running through this city for 3,000 years, that the ancient Romans built temples beside, that the medieval popes built their hospitals beside, that floods every spring and recedes every summer and carries in its brown water everything that this city has put into it. The sound of it tonight is a low, continuous murmur, almost like breath, and then a shift, not dramatic, not sudden, but something changes in the fever. You can feel it the way you can feel a storm breaking, the way the pressure changes before rain. The heat, which has been at its maximum for hours, begins very slowly by degrees to retreat. Your body, which has been rigid with the effort of fighting, softens slightly. You sweat so much that afterward the sheets have to be changed. You're barely aware of this process. The night brother and young woman who works the night shift moving around you, the cold damp sheets replaced with dry ones, and this simple sensation, clean dry linen against skin that has been drenched for hours. This is, in this moment, one of the finest things you've ever felt. The fever has broken, not gone. It will cycle back, but the crisis has passed. La Française puts her hand on your forehead one more time, checks your pulse. "Better," she says. "Thank you," you say. She says something in French, low, too low, or too fast to catch. Then in Italian, "Sleep." You sleep. You wake to the sound of bells. Not the aggressive pre-dawn bells of a working morning, the bells that pull you from sleep by the scruff and demand you stand up and function. These are the mid-morning bells, the slower, more considered ones, the ones that ring when the day has already established itself and is simply marking the hours as a formality. You lie still and take stock. The fever is present. You can feel it, a warmth in your chest, a pressure behind your eyes, a slight blurring at the edges of the world. But it is not last night's fever. Last night was a country you visited and have returned from. This is the ordinary version, the one you've been living in for nearly 2 weeks. The distinction feels enormous. Teodoro is sitting up in the bed beside you, eating bread. He has the composure of a man who sat with you through a crisis and has now returned to his normal schedule and doesn't intend to make a production of it. "You sound better," he says. "Your breathing is different." "Different how?" "Last night it sounded like work. Now it sounds like breathing." He passes you a piece of bread, not offering, giving, placing it in your hand with the directness of someone who's made a calculation and decided. You eat it. The bread is stale and slightly salt, and you taste every grain of it. Your body, which has been refusing food for days, is suddenly and urgently interested in bread. You eat the piece he gives you and feel a wave of something that isn't quite hunger and isn't quite relief. A physical gratitude, your body acknowledging the input. "She came back this morning," Teodoro says. "Who?" He gives you a look. "La Francese, early, before the other rounds. She checked you, looked satisfied with something, and left a note for Ferretti." You look at the small table beside the bed. A folded paper propped against the water pitcher. Your name on the outside. Inside, a prescription. Cinchona bark, 4 grains 3 times daily, to continue for 14 days. Signed with initials you can't fully make out. And below the medical instruction, in slightly different handwriting, smaller, as if written quickly, as if an afterthought, a single sentence in French. You don't speak French, but you put the note back on the table carefully, propped where you found it, and leave it there for the rest of your time in the ward. Some things you keep even when you don't fully understand them. The days after a crisis have a specific quality. You have stepped back from an edge. The step back wasn't beautiful. It was soaked through with fever sweat and fear and the voice of a woman you'll never properly identify talking to you in 2 languages in the dark. But you stepped back, and now you're here, in the ward, still sick, but less specifically dying, which means your brain begins cautiously to re-engage. You start to see the ward properly, not the blurred panorama you've been experiencing for a week, the shapes in beds, the movement of white-habited figures, the quality of light through shuttered windows. Now you start to see the specific, the particular, the way this specific room works day by day, hour by hour. The physical space first. The ward is long, 60 feet or so, wide enough that the beds on opposite sides don't overlap into the central space. The ceiling is vaulted, barrel vaulted, with the proportions of the 15th century. Generous height, designed for air circulation, in a period when people understood empirically, without the vocabulary to explain it, that sick people in close quarters needed to breathe. The floor is stone, the walls are plastered, and you notice the plasterwork because you are a plaster worker and you can't not notice, and the plasterwork is good, original work in places, the Arricchio coat sound, the intonico smooth, though in certain sections near the windows the damp has gotten in, and the paint is peeling in the lazy gradual way of a building being asked to perform a function that strains its materials. There are 4 windows on the south wall, long, narrow, set high in the wall, with shutters that can be opened or half opened or closed in graduated combinations to control the air and light. The sisters manage these shutters with the precision of sailors managing sails, fully open in the early morning to let in the coolest air, half closed by mid-morning to block the rising heat, opened again in late afternoon when the sun has moved and a slight breeze sometimes comes up from the river. The smell of the ward changes with the windows. Closed, concentrated, warm. The full weight of 90 bodies in various states of illness. Open, still warm, still present, but diluted by outside air, Roman summer air, which has its own issues, but is nevertheless air that has not been breathed by everyone in the room already. You start to understand the economics of attention. The ward has perhaps 8 nuns and brothers working it at any given time during the day, 90 patients. The mathematics of care are simple. Each caregiver is responsible for 11 or 12 patients at minimum, and the patients are not distributed equally by need. The man near Vincenzo's end of the ward, the one who seems to be in the late stages of something worse than fever, requires more of one nun's time than the rest of her patients combined. This means other patients get slightly less. Nobody is neglected. That's the remarkable thing. Nobody is left with an empty water pitcher. Nobody spends a night without the sheets being checked. The level of basic care is, by the standards of 1837 charity medicine, genuinely good. But it is also genuinely limited. There are not enough hands. There will never be enough hands. The building absorbs whatever is given and requires more. You watch a young lay brother who can't be more than 16, clearly new, clearly still finding his footing in this work, make his way carefully down the row of beds with a tray of medicine cups. He's concentrating hard. The tray trembles slightly. He reaches each patient, holds out the cup, waits for it to be taken, or helps, if it can't be taken, moves on. His face throughout this procedure has the expression of someone performing a task they know is important, and are not yet sure they're doing well enough. He reaches a bed 3 down from yours where the patient, a man who's admitted 2 days ago, who's barely moved since, doesn't respond to the cup being held out. The brother tries again. Still nothing. He puts down the tray on the edge of the next bed. He puts his hand on the man's shoulder. He says, something low that you can't hear. Then he straightens. He makes a small specific gesture with his right hand across and picks up the tray and continues. He comes to you next. His face has not changed. His hands on the tray are steady now. He gives you the medicine cup. You take it. The quinine is as bitter as ever. Thank you, you say. He nods, moves on. You don't know if he's been doing this for days or for years, but you watch him go down the ward and you think, whatever it takes to do this work and keep doing it, he's in the process of building it. Whatever Vincenzo has, that composure, that settled stillness, this boy is in the construction of it, day by day, cup by cup. In the afternoons, in the calm phase, you and Teodoro talk, not constantly, not with the desperate volubility of people who have nothing else to do, more like 2 people who have discovered they're travelling in the same direction and have fallen into step. Conversation that begins because there's something worth saying and stops when there isn't. Teodoro has been in Rome since 1822. 15 years. He came at 36, which is late to transplant yourself to a new city, and he came for a specific reason: work. The print shops of Rome in the 1820s were in the middle of an expansion that the city's intellectual and religious life demanded, and the church's appetite for printed material sustained. He came with his compositor's case and his practised hands and found work within 2 days of arriving. He knows the city the way you only know a place after 15 years, not the grand city that tourists see, but the city underneath, the city of connections and streets and who lives where and which courtyard you can cut through to avoid the crowds on a market day. The hospital has been here since I arrived, he says, since before I arrived, since before my father was born. Have you been in here before? Once. In 1829, different fever, intestinal. I was in the men's medical ward. For 3 weeks, he pauses. Different ward, same building, same smell more or less. You came back. I came back. He turns the word slightly as if checking its weight. You don't really choose where you get sick. You just get sick somewhere. He tells you about the hospital's history in the way a local tells you things, not as a presentation, but as an accumulation of what he's heard over 15 years, filtered through his own experience and observation. The hospital was founded, or rather refounded in its current form, by Pope Innocent III in the late 12th century. Not the first hospital on this site, but the one that established the institution. Innocent had been informed of the bodies of foundlings, abandoned babies, being found in the Tiber, thrown in by mothers who couldn't feed them or didn't want them, and he established the hospital partly as a foundling home, a place for children who would otherwise die in the river. The rota, the wheel, you saw it when you arrived, set into the exterior wall of the hospital near the admissions entrance, a wooden rotating drum set into the wall, designed so that a woman, any woman, no questions asked, no names taken, could place an infant in the drum, rotate it, ring the bell, and walk away. The baby would be inside, the mother would be gone, the hospital would take the child. The wheel is still there in 1837, still in use. You think about this for a moment, the long continuity of it, the desperate logic that produces the same gesture across centuries. A mother, a child she cannot keep, a wheel in a wall, an institution old enough to have made this accommodation. How many babies, you ask? Teodoro shrugs. In good years, 12 a month. In bad years, famine, epidemic, economic collapse, more. The year Napoleon came through, I'm told, the wheel turned so often the brothers worked through the night taking children in. He says this without sentiment, not callousness, something more precise than that. The simple acknowledgement that large numbers of terrible things have happened, are happening, will happen, and that the appropriate response to this knowledge is not to look away and not to be destroyed by looking, but to stay in some middle position, clear-eyed and steady. You ask him about his work, the print shop. He talks about typography with the same pleasure that Salvatore talks about plasterwork, the pleasure of a craftsman in the specifics of a craft, the way precision becomes its own form of beauty. He talks about the weight of individual type pieces, the cold metal of a freshly set line, the way a well-composed page has a visual balance that isn't fully visible until you step back and see it as a whole. He talks about the papers he's set, papal documents and legal notices and pamphlets and the occasional book, and the way you can tell from the quality of a print job the degree to which the compositor cared about what he was doing. Most texts I've set, he says, I didn't agree with. What do you mean? Papal bulls, decrees, condemnations of various ideas the church doesn't like. I set the type. I make the words possible. The words aren't mine. Does that bother you? He thinks about this seriously, as he thinks about everything. It would bother me more if I thought the words had great power, but words on paper are not the same as words in heads. Someone prints a condemnation of, let's say, of one of the new philosophical ideas coming from France, and the condemnation is printed on nice paper and distributed, and the philosophical idea continues to spread anyway, because ideas don't care about official opposition. They just need someone to carry them. He's quiet for a moment. The words travel, he says. The condemnations stay home. On the 11th day, they amputate Vincenzo's leg. You don't witness the procedure. There's a screen, an actual folding screen, brought in from a storage room by two brothers, positioned around Vincenzo's bed in the mid-morning. The ward goes quiet when the screen goes up, the way a room goes quiet when something serious has been acknowledged. The patients near Vincenzo who are talking stop talking. The ones farther away, who can still see the screen, the top of it, the way the light changes on the wall around it, fall into the same quiet. The sounds are not dramatic. You expected them to be more dramatic. There is talking, the chief physician and the surgeon who has been brought in. Their voice is steady and professional. Vincenzo's voice, which does not change its character, which speaks when spoken to with the same thick Romanesco, the same composure. There is the sound of instruments on the metal tray, precise metallic clicks, small mechanical sounds. There is a silence that stretches, and then, not a scream, something lower than a scream, something that comes from deep in the chest, from below the voice, from whatever part of a person cannot maintain composure in every circumstance, no matter how sincerely that composure has been chosen. One sound, it stops, then breathing, then quiet. Father Damaso is already at the screen before it's fully up. He was there when the screen went up. He stays. The brothers remove two basins and a folded cloth that is dark-coloured in a way you don't look at directly. The screen comes down. Vincenzo is lying flat. He looks the same as before, except for the shape of the blanket over his legs, or where his left leg was. The shape is wrong now, the wrong length, the wrong slope. His face is turned toward the wall. His hands, lying on top of the blanket, are very still. Father Damaso sits beside him for the rest of the afternoon. Nobody in the ward talks about it directly. The thing happened, and everyone absorbed it in their own way, and life continued. The soup at midday, the medicine rounds in the afternoon, the slow, long passage of the afternoon hours. But the ward is different for the rest of that day. Quieter, more internal. In the evening, Vincenzo turns his face from the wall. He looks at the ceiling for a while, then he looks at Father Damaso, who is still there because Father Damaso is always there. He says something in that thick Romanesco. The priest replies. Vincenzo makes a sound that, you have to look twice to be sure, is a laugh. Brief, almost inaudible, but unmistakably a laugh. You look at Teodoro. Teodoro is already looking at you. Neither of you says anything, but you think, there is some quantity of human endurance that cannot be measured or taught, only witnessed. You're witnessing it. It will not leave you. On the 13th day, you are well enough to walk to the window. Well enough is relative. Your legs are uncertain beneath you in the way that legs become after 2 weeks of lying down. They work, but they don't quite trust themselves, each step slightly tentative, as if checking the ground. Your balance requires monitoring. The distance between your bed and the window is perhaps 20 feet, and you cover it with the concentrated attention of someone learning to walk for the second time. But you get there. The window is on the south side of the ward, set high in the wall, but with a ledge wide enough to lean your forearms on, which is what you do. The shutters are angled today, half open, letting in a bar of white afternoon light that crosses the floor at a long diagonal. You push one shutter slightly wider and look out. Rome. The hospital faces south and slightly west, and from this window, in the afternoon light of late August, what you see is the city as it actually is. Not the curated version, not the grand perspective, but the dense, specific, heated reality of 400,000 people living in a river valley between hills. The rooftops first. Terracotta, layered and uneven. The tiles overlapping in the specific Italian way that is practical and beautiful simultaneously. The colours ranging from the deep red of new tiles to the bleached pink of ancient ones, faded by decades of Roman sun. There are hundreds of rooftops visible from here, maybe thousands. A broken landscape of slopes and terraces and small walls, punctuated by the vertical marks of chimneys and the occasional bell tower rising clean above the horizontal. On several rooftops, laundry is hanging in the afternoon heat. White shirts, coloured cloths, moving slightly in what might be a breeze or might just be your own wishful perception. Beyond the rooftops, hills. The Janiculum to the west, green against the white sky. The Aventine to the south. And, turning slightly right, the Palatine and beyond it the Caelian, the ancient hills of the ancient city, their slopes broken by the dark cypress trees that grow in the gardens of the religious houses and the ancient ruins that sit among them like half-remembered thoughts. And the sky. Rome's sky in late August afternoon is a very specific thing. The blue is not the aggressive blue of midday, it's something deeper, more considered. The blue of a sky that has been thinking for several hours and has arrived at a conclusion. There are clouds at the horizon, the heavy cumulus clouds of the season, building in the east with the unhurried confidence of things that have, all afternoon, and everywhere, birds. Rome is a city of birds in ways that you've been too busy and too sick to notice until now. Swifts, the main ones. They fill the Roman sky all summer with their knife-edged shapes and their high-cutting cries, riding the thermals above the hot stone with an efficiency that borders on contempt for anything earthbound. And below the swifts, pigeons in their hundreds, working the piazzas and the rooftops and the edges of the cornices. And further off toward the river, something larger, herons maybe, the grey herons that work the shallows of the Tiber in the mornings. The smell from the window is the smell of Rome in afternoon heat. You know it well by now. The familiar compound of the city, stone and dung and river water and heat. But from this height, through this window, it carries something else too. The faint green smell of vegetation, of the gardens and the parks and the trees growing wherever the city has left them room. Something almost botanical in it. Something alive, reminding you that under and between all the human construction, this is a place where things grow. You stand at the window for a long time. Teodoro comes to stand beside you after a few minutes. He'd been well enough to walk for over a week, has more or less claimed this window as his afternoon post. He stands with his forearms on the ledge the same way you do, looking out. There's the Palatine, he says, pointing. Augustus was born on the slope. Nero built his palace there. They're all ruins now. You can see the top of the walls from here if the light is right. You look where he points. Yes, the broken-topped walls of something ancient, crowded by cypress. Cicero wrote letters. From this city, you say? You told me about the fevers he described. 1,500 years ago, and the fever is still here. The city is still here, Teodoro says. That's the more remarkable fact. He's right. You think about what this city has been. The empire that spread from this point across Europe and North Africa and the Middle East, building roads and aqueducts and legal systems that still structure everything. Then the collapse, the aqueducts cut, the population falling from 1 million to perhaps 20,000, the great buildings used as quarries for their stone, cows grazing in the forum. Then the medieval city growing up inside the ruins of the ancient one. The churches being built from the materials of the temples, the old god spaces becoming new god spaces. Then the Renaissance, the popes as patrons, the artists arriving, the city being rebuilt again into something magnificent and strange. And now, 1837, the papal city, the city where 1,000 years of religious authority are institutionalized in buildings and hospitals and hierarchies that are simultaneously magnificent and desperately inadequate for the needs of the actual people living and dying in them. The same hills, the same river, the same fever in the summer air. Does it make you feel small, you ask? Teodoro considers this. It makes me feel specific, he says, like I am this exact person in this exact moment, which will not come again. The city was here before me and will be hereafter. But this... He makes a slight gesture encompassing the window, the ward behind them, the afternoon light, the swifts crossing the rectangle of visible sky. This exact configuration will not happen again. He's quiet for a moment. That's not small. That's particular. I'd rather be particular than general. The swifts cross the window again, and again, their cries so high they're almost above hearing. In the weeks you're in the ward, you watch the admissions. They come every afternoon. The new patients. The brother brings them in from the corridor with the same few words, the same practiced efficiency. He shows them their bed, tells them the rules, the meal times, the water on the table, the call for the night brother if something changes. He answers their questions the same way every day, briefly, accurately, without drama. The people who come through those doors, a young man from a village in the Apennines whose hands, even through the fever, have the specific roughness of someone who's been cutting stone or mining or doing something with rock for years. He looks at the ward with the open, slightly stunned expression of a person confronting something much larger than their experience has prepared them for. By the second day he's adjusted, not cheerful, not resigned, but adapted. He starts to learn the ward's rhythms the way you learn any new place's rhythms, by watching, noting, fitting yourself into the gaps. A woman in her 40s, one of the few women in what is predominantly a men's ward, admitted with symptoms that the admitting brother judges to be consistent with the fever and that require the women's ward, which is full, to overflow into here. She does not acknowledge the men around her, and the men around her have the decency to return the favour. She has a rosary in her right hand that she works continuously, silently, her fingers moving with the automaticity of a practised hand doing a familiar thing. You never learn her name. By the time you're well enough to be curious, she's been moved to the women's ward and gone. A priest. Middle-aged from somewhere north. His accent places him well above Rome, maybe the Veneto. He's embarrassed to be sick, you can see it. Embarrassed by the vulnerability, embarrassed by the body's insistence on its own needs. He accepts the treatment with a formality that's covering something else, something that takes 3 days to crack, and when it cracks in the usual way. The simple physical need for someone to know that you're frightened, which the nearest nun provides without being asked, without making it significant, just sitting on the stool beside his bed for 20 minutes one evening while he talks. Afterward he seems better. Not physically, the fever doesn't care about emotional resolutions, but something has relaxed in him. Some expenditure of energy that was going toward maintenance has been released for recovery, and the ones who don't get better. You know by now, everyone in the ward knows, the pattern of a body that isn't recovering, the fever that doesn't cycle, that maintains a flat, elevated temperature without the classical cold and hot alternation, the progressive loss of responsiveness, the breathing that becomes audible in the wrong ways, the colour that goes from feverish flush to something deeper and more final. There are 5 deaths in the ward during the weeks you're there, not all of them in your immediate vicinity, not all of them visible. But you know, the ward knows. The ward absorbs each one into its ongoing texture, the morning check that finds a stillness, the screen that goes up, the screen that comes down, the bed that empties and fills again. One of them is Pietro Salvemini's brother Luca. Luca dies on a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week of your stay. Pietro's holding his hand. The brothers let him. The nurse on the ward has been watching the pattern of Luca's breathing for 2 days, has been staying close, has managed the timing so that Pietro is there and awake when it happens. Pietro sits with his brother for an hour after. Nobody asks him to move. The brothers come and go around him. The ward's routine continues because the ward's routine has to continue, but nobody asks him to move. When he finally gets up from the stool and turns, his face has the specific quality of someone who has done what they came to do and knows it. Not peaceful. Peace is a different thing, a longer thing, but resolved. Present. He's been there. He was there. He nods at you when he passes your bed. You nod back. Words seem insufficient and also unnecessary. On the 17th day, La Franchise and Ferretti have an argument. You hear it because it happens in the corridor outside the ward, and the door is open, and the ward is quiet in the midday lull and voices carry. You don't understand all of it. Medical terminology you don't have, but you understand the structure. Ferretti. Something about treatment protocols, about bark being given liberally without adequate assessment, about the risks of over-reliance on a single remedy. La Française. Something about outcomes, about specific patients, about the correlation between early quinine administration and recovery rates. Ferretti. Something about experience, about the evidence available, about the proper place of women in clinical practice. A pause. La Française. Something that starts quietly and ends less quietly. A door closing, the ward, doesn't react visibly. The patients who are awake stare at the ceiling or the floor or their hands. Teodoro is reading. He's gotten his hands on a small printed text from somewhere, holding it at exactly 14 inches with his compositor's precision. After a few minutes, La Franchise comes into the ward. She does her rounds. Her expression is composed. Her hands are steady. She gives you your quinine at the afternoon dose and checks your pulse and notes something in the small book she carries. She doesn't mention the argument. Better, she says, looking at you with a specific attention she always brings. The cycle is shortening. Another week, perhaps 10 days, and you should be ready to leave. Ready or ready enough, you ask? Something moves briefly across her face, not a smile exactly. The infrastructure of a smile, maybe. Ready enough, she says. She moves to the next patient. You look at Teodoro. The young one bled another man this morning, Teodoro says, not looking up. From his book. Who? The new one. The one from the mountains. Did she... She saw it after. She said nothing. She gave him bark in the afternoon dose. You think about this. The gap between what is known and what is practiced. The gap between what she knows and what the hospital's hierarchy allows her to do. The argument in the corridor that changed nothing formally and might have changed one or two things informally, might have made Ferretti slightly less reflexive in his application of the lancet, might have been one small recalibration in a process that will take decades to complete, She came. She brought her own quinine. She argued in the corridor and then came back into the ward and did her work. The science she's working from, the connection between cinchona bark and malarial fever, is sound. The mechanism she doesn't know. Nobody does. The specific parasite won't be identified for decades. The specific mosquito vector won't be confirmed for longer still. But she's right. Anyway, being right before the evidence catches up with you is a specific and often lonely kind of courage. In the long afternoons, you think about the walls, not metaphorically, the actual walls of this room, which you've been looking at for nearly 3 weeks, and which have begun to speak to you the way walls speak to plasterers, in the language of layers. The plasterwork of the ward is old. The orecchio, the base coat, is from the 15th century, you're almost certain. The texture of it, visible where the upper coat has flaked away in the corners near the floor, has the specific quality of Renaissance lime plaster, a quality that comes from the combination of carefully aged lime putty and fine sand and the craft knowledge of plasterers who had been refining the same technique for generations. Someone stood in this room 500 years ago and did what you do. Applied the first coat, waited for it to cure, applied the second, smoothed it, stepped back, evaluated. Above, where Vincenzo's bed is, now empty, Vincenzo having been moved to a recovery room when his surgical wound stabilised, there's a section of the original ceiling border still visible, painted plasterwork, an interlaced pattern, faded but present, the kind of decorative frieze that would have been standard in a 15th century institutional building. The pigments have gone pale over the centuries. What was once vermilion is now a faded rose. What was once deep blue is a ghost of blue. But the line quality is still there. The precision of the work. 5 centuries of this room. 5 centuries of people lying in beds beneath this ceiling, looking up at this plasterwork, being tended by whoever was available to tend them. The original monks, then the sisters of various orders as the institution evolved, the physicians, generation after generation of them, working with the theories available to them, doing what they believed was right, killing some people with the treatments and saving others, their conviction largely indistinguishable from confidence, and the patients, the labourers and pilgrims and artists and priests and soldiers and women and children and old men, that this institution has been absorbing since the 12th century. All of them lying in beds under this ceiling, or beds in the previous building, or the one before that, all on this same stretch of the Tiber's bank, looking up at something overhead while their bodies fought, or didn't fight, or didn't know what they were doing. You are one bead on a string that goes back farther than you can see. This thought doesn't comfort you exactly, but it does something. It places you, gives you a position in a larger pattern that makes your specific suffering specific rather than singular. You're not uniquely afflicted. You're not uniquely enduring. You're one more person doing what people do here, lying in this room, looking up, waiting. Teodoro sees you staring at the ceiling. The frieze, he asks. Yes. I've been looking at it since I arrived, trying to date it by the design. I'd say 1475, maybe 1480, Sixtus the Fourth period. Teodoro looks at you with something that might be surprise. How do you know that? Plasterer, you say. It's in the line quality of the base coat, and the pattern, that interlacing style, was very specific to Roman workshops in the 1470s. You can see similar work in 3 or 4 of the churches on the south side of the Tiber. He looks at the frieze again. 1475, he says, the same year the press arrived in Rome. What press? The first printing press. Sweenheim and Panartz, two German printers who brought the technology to Rome in 1465. By 1475 there were printing shops all over the city. He pauses. The same year someone painted that frieze, someone in a workshop 3 miles from here was setting the first pages of the first Roman edition of Cicero. You both look at the frieze, the plaster going on that wall, the ink going onto that page. The year lives in the room around you, suddenly present. 3 days before, La Francaise tells you you're ready. You know it yourself. The fever is still present. Quartan fever doesn't resolve cleanly, doesn't pack up and announce its departure. It recedes. The cycles grow longer and shallower, the cold phase less cold, the hot phase less hot, the sweating phase less absolute. One morning you wake up and the fever isn't there at first, and for a second, for the half-second Teodoro described as déjà vu that first morning, you forget where you are. Then it comes back, lighter. A reminder, not a siege. Your body's beginning to remember things. What it's like to be hungry. What it's like to think clearly. To follow a train of thought from start to finish without the fever intercepting it. The specific pleasure of sitting up without the world tilting. You can walk to the window and back without having to stop. You eat the entire bowl of soup at midday and the entire piece of bread at evening. You ask Teodoro to tell you about the streets between here and your old room in Trastevere, and he does. Slowly, with his compositor's precision, building the route in words block by block, and you walk it in your head and find that it's still there. The map of the city, intact inside you, waiting. 3 days before your discharge, the young man from the Apennines, his name, you've learned, is Marco, is discharged. He walks out with the same open, slightly stunned expression he arrived with, though the content of the stun has changed. He came in stunned by the scale of a thing larger than his experience. He's leaving stunned by the fact that he got through it. He stops by your bed on his way out. He has his shirt and his jacket, his worldly goods more or less. He looks at you. You're next, he says. Not as a prediction, as encouragement. The way you say this when you've been through something and you mean, it ends. It actually ends. Good luck, you say. He nods. He goes. The night before your discharge, you're lying in the bed that has been your specific geography for almost 3 weeks. The shape of the straw mattress has been modified by your own body. There's a slight impression where your hip has rested, a slight warmth that is always there now. Your warmth. Yours, specifically. You're aware that this is temporary. Tomorrow someone else will lie here, and within days the mattress will hold their shape instead. The bed is not yours. It was never yours. It's the bed of whoever needs it. But tonight, it's yours. Teodoro is asleep, or doing what he does, which is a version of sleep that you've stopped being able to distinguish from wakefulness. The eyes closed, the breathing regular, the face fully composed in a way that seems too deliberate to be unconscious. He will be in the ward for at least another week. He knew this before you did. He told you yesterday, matter-of-factly, that his cycle was taking longer to shorten than yours. My lungs were never good, he said, even before this. The print shop air, lead dust, ink vapour year after year, not ideal. You wanted to say something reassuring and couldn't find anything that was true enough to say. I'll be fine, he said, preempting you. I've been fine before. The ward at night. You know it properly now, 3 weeks in. You know the pattern of the coughing, which patients are having a bad night, which are sleeping relatively well, which are in the flat fever that means nothing good. You know the sound of the night brother's rounds, the specific quality of his footsteps, which are lighter than the day brother's, more tentative in the dark. You know the way the lamp in the corridor makes the wall outside the door glow a specific shade of amber orange. You know the smell. You've been living in it long enough that it has sorted itself. The separate notes have clarified. The compound has become familiar. Lye, vinegar, the warm organic smell of bodies, the occasional sharp, medicinal note when a dressing is changed nearby, the stone of the walls which has its own smell, old, mineral, faintly chalky, the smell of lime plaster that has been present for 5 centuries. You think about what you're taking with you when you leave, not material things. Your clothes are here, washed once by a lay brother while you wore a spare shirt from the hospital's supply, which is rough linen with a faint institutional smell that you'll always associate with the early days of the fever. Your knife, which you'd had in your pocket when Giacomo brought you here, and which has been sitting on the small bedside table for 3 weeks. 22 days of being conscious enough to think, which is a different thing from the thinking you were doing before the fever. You're taking that with you, the thinking after the fever. You're taking Teodoro's face, that specific composure, those 15 years of accumulated patience. You're taking the young lay brother with the trembling tray who kept moving. You're taking Vincenzo's hands on the blanket after the surgery, the absolute stillness of them, the laugh that came later. You're taking the fever itself, which has changed your body in ways you'll spend the next months understanding, the weight loss, the weakness that will take a season to fully repair, the residual cycles that may come back every year for the rest of your life, the body's memory of what it survived. Malarial fever in the 19th century leaves a mark. Not metaphorically, physiologically. The parasite persists in the liver. The fever can return. Some people cycle through it for decades. Every spring, every autumn, the familiar cold, the familiar heat, the sweating, the calm. Some people's fevers finally stop. Some people's don't. You don't know which category you'll be in, but you'll be out of this ward. And being out of this ward, breathing air that isn't the ward's air, walking streets that go somewhere instead of between beds, existing in the ordinary dimensions of the city, seems, from inside this bed on this night, like an enormous and specific gift. Vincenzo is gone, to the recovery room, to whatever comes after. But there's a new man in Vincenzo's bed who arrived 2 days ago from somewhere in the Lazio countryside. Young, frightened, in the full intensity of the first fever cycle. You watched him arrive with the recognition of someone who's been where he is. The disorientation, the scale of the place, the specific helplessness of a sick body in an unfamiliar institution. On his first evening before the cold phase hit him again, he looked at you across the ward. You said what Marco said to you. It ends. It actually ends. He didn't look like he believed you. That's all right. You didn't believe it either at first, but it does. You close your eyes. The ward breathes around you. The Tiber runs below the window, saying what it always says, which is nothing specific and everything general, the oldest sound in the city. You let the night take you. You wake before the bell. This hasn't happened in 3 weeks. Your body has been conserving everything for the fever's work, sleeping until the last possible moment, treating consciousness as an expensive luxury. Today you wake in the dark, the ward still in its night configuration, the corridor lamp still burning amber, and you're awake properly, cleanly, without the usual transition through fever fog. You lie still for a moment, just experiencing this, being awake, being not very sick, being present in the room in a way that feels voluntary. Then you get up, you dress quietly. Your clothes, the ones you arrived in, are clean, folded on the chair beside the bed. You put them on in the dark, by feel. The linen of your shirt is rough and cool. Your jacket, which is thick wool despite the summer, feels like putting on a layer of decision, like saying, I am a person who goes somewhere. I am a person who leaves. Your boots, you sit on the edge of the bed to put them on, and Teodoro, without opening his eyes, says, They'll give you breakfast before you go. I know. The quinine prescription, La Francaise left it with the admissions office. You can get it from any apothecary. Don't stop taking it when you feel well. That's when people stop and the fever comes back. I know. And drink the wine, he says. Not the river water, the wine. I know, Teodoro. A pause. Good, he says. And then, you were decent company for a man who was mostly unconscious. You look at him. He still hasn't opened his eyes. When you get out, you say, if you come to Trastevere, there's an osteria on the Via della Lungaretta that does a decent plate of cacio e pepe. Ask for the house wine, not the good wine. The house wine is what they actually made themselves. He nods, eyes still closed, taking the information seriously, which is how he takes all information. I'll find it, he says. You pick up your jacket, your knife, the note from Ella, Francis, which has been on the bedside table for 17 days and which you fold carefully and put in your inside pocket without looking at it again. You walk to the door of the ward. At the door, you stop. You turn back. Not for long, just to look at the room once more. The long vaulted space, the beds, the bodies in them. The vaulted ceiling with its faded 15th century frieze. The windows on the south wall, shutters still closed against the pre-dawn dark. The corridor lamp's light reaching in from outside, amber against stone. 80 or so men in this room right now. 80 individual illnesses, individual histories, individual fears and accommodations, and small private arrangements with mortality. Teodoro in the second bed from the door, lying with his eyes closed and his hands composed on the blanket, the ink stains in his knuckles. The man from Lazio in what was Vincenzo's bed, starting his own count of days. All of it continuing without you now, which is how it should be. You turn and walk out. The street hits you like a physical thing. Not the smell, or not only the smell, though the smell of the city outside the hospital is genuinely different from the smell inside. A rougher, more various, less managed compound of things. The city not trying to keep order over itself, but just being what it is. The physical thing is the scale, the openness. After 3 weeks in the ward, the open sky above the Via dei Penitenzieri is overwhelming in a specific way. Not unpleasant, but requiring adjustment. Your eyes have calibrated themselves to 60 feet of interior space. The exterior world is larger than they're ready for. The sky seems excessive. The distance to the buildings on the far side of the street, perhaps 30 feet, seems far. You stand on the hospital steps for a moment, just breathing. The street is early morning quiet, not empty. Rome is never empty, but quiet in the specific way of a city before it has fully committed to the day. A man with a cart of vegetables is going south toward the Campo de Fiori. A woman is carrying something on her head, a basket of laundry probably, walking with the upright, efficient posture that comes from a lifetime of carrying things on your head. A dog is sitting in the middle of the street doing nothing in particular with the philosophical patience of a dog that has decided this particular spot is as good as any other. Above all of it, Rome's morning sky. September now. The light has changed from August. It's cooler, more horizontal, the sun not yet at the angle that turns everything white. The colour of the buildings, the ochre and terracotta and pale limestone, is more saturated in this light, more itself. You take a step, your legs hold, you take another step, and you walk. The route from Santo Spirito to Trastevere crosses the Tiber and climbs slightly into the tangle of streets that is your neighbourhood. You take it slowly, not because you have to, or not only because you have to, but because something in you wants to walk carefully, wants to give each thing its due attention. The city you left 3 weeks ago and the city you're returning to are the same city, but you are not the same person, and the things you were moving through too quickly before, with the tunnel vision of a man in good health who has things to do, deserve to be seen properly. The bridge first. You cross the Tiber at the Ponte Sisto, a pedestrian bridge rebuilt by Sixtus IV in the 15th century, which Teodoro would know. You stop in the middle because you promised yourself you would. The Tiber in September morning, lower now than in the summer, the late-season river pulled back from its flood level, showing the brown stone of its banks, the reeds at the water's edge. The surface has the thick, slightly opaque quality of the Roman river, the brownish-green water that has been carrying the city's waste to the sea since before there was a city here to produce waste. It doesn't smell as bad as it did in August. Slightly. You look downstream toward the hospital, invisible from here, around the bend hidden by the dense building, but you can see the general direction of it, the area of sky above where it must be, the slight rise of the building's profile. You were in there, you came out, that seems important enough to mark. Upstream, the dome of St. Peter's, 500 metres away, rising from behind the Borgo's rooftops in the morning light. It was begun in the early 16th century and took 120 years to complete. Michelangelo designed the dome. He died before it was finished. That's the thing about Rome's great buildings. Most of them outlast the people who built them by centuries. The people are gone. The architects, the plasterers, the painters, the patrons who paid for everything, and the buildings remain, still in use, still absorbing the footsteps of new people who arrive thinking they'll live there forever and mostly don't. The plasterers who did the frieze in your ward are gone. Their work is still on the wall. In whatever sense anything lasts, that lasts. You turn away from the river and keep walking. On the way back to the room, you stop at an apothecary on the Via della Lungaretta. Not the closest one. There's a close one on the corner of your street. But Teodoro mentioned this one. One of the apothecaries who can be trusted to source cinchona bark properly, not to adulterate it with cheaper substances, not to weigh the paper along with the compound. The shop is narrow and low-ceilinged and smells extraordinarily of itself. The accumulated aromas of every herb and compound and preparation that has been mixed and stored and sold here, layered over each other into a complexity that is almost its own climate. Dried herbs in bundles hanging from the ceiling rafters, ceramic jars in rows on wooden shelves behind the counter, each labelled in a clear hand, glass-fronted cases with the more expensive preparations behind them. The apothecary is a small, precise man of 50-something who examines La Francese's prescription note with the concentrated attention of someone accustomed to interpreting various handwritings. French, he says, a statement, not a question. She works at Santo Spirito, he nods. He measures the cinchona bark, precisely twice checking the balance, and folds it into a small paper parcel and writes the dosage instructions on the outside. Every day, he says, even when the fever's gone. I know. Everyone knows, he says, and nobody does it. He looks at you over the parcel. Be the exception. The bark costs what it costs. More than you'd like. Less than dying. You put it in your pocket and go home. The room is exactly as you left it. Giacomo's side is messier than when you were in it with him, which tracks. Your side is exactly as you left it, the morning Giacomo took you to the hospital, the spare shirt folded on the chair, the small bundle of your tools in the corner, the copy of a prayer card someone gave you when you left Viterbo, tucked into the frame of the small mirror above the basin. You sit on the edge of the bed. The bed is yours, single, not shared, which suddenly seems like an extraordinary luxury. The mattress is not much better than the hospital's, but it is entirely yours, and that means something specific after 3 weeks. The basin has a thin film of dust on the water's surface. You get fresh water from the fountain on the street. A short walk which your legs do without complaint, which you note, and wash your face and your hands properly with the rough brown soap Giacomo keeps on the window ledge. The sensation is enormous. Clean water on clean skin, the soap's alkaline sharpness, the coarse towel afterward, things your body remembers better than your mind does. Things that got filed under ordinary and are only revealed as extraordinary when you've been without them. You eat bread and cheese standing at the window looking at the street. A woman is hanging laundry from a line strung between her window and the bracket on the opposite building. 2 boys are arguing about something important enough to argue about, but apparently not important enough to resolve. Their voices carrying the specific Italian quality of an argument that is also a kind of affection. A cart horse is standing at the intersection of 2 lanes, patient and indifferent, waiting for its driver to finish something. The street is doing what streets do. Going on, being itself. You've been gone 3 weeks. Rome hasn't noticed. The street hasn't noticed. The woman with the laundry and the boys and the horse were all here when you left, and they're all here now. This is either humbling or reassuring, and you decide it is both. You go to the workshop not to ask for your job back. Not yet, not today. Just to go. To stand in the courtyard where Salvatore's wife pressed vinegar to your forehead and tell yourself, here is a before, here is an after. Salvatore is in the courtyard mixing plaster. He looks up. He looks at you for a moment. You're thin, he says. Yes. You look like someone tied you to a drain for a month. 3 weeks, you say, more or less. He keeps mixing. The plaster makes its specific sound, the soft, heavy slap of material being worked against the sides of the trough, the scrape of the hoe, the rhythm of someone who's done this 10,000 times and whose body does it without the intervention of thought. Can you work? He asks. Next week, you say. Maybe the week after. I need to. Next week, he repeats. Not agreeing with you, simply repeating it as if to hear how it sounds. He looks at you again, properly this time. You're lucky, he says. You know that. I know. Filippo, the one who went home in June, he died. The family sent word. You absorb this. Filippo from Abruzzo, who left in June with the fever, who went back to his village. I didn't know, you say. Now you do? He goes back to the plaster. Next week, not before. He's not a man who says many things, but the things he says have the weight of what was decided before they were spoken. You go home. Evening comes slowly in September Rome. Not the vertical drop of summer darkness, but a long diagonal descent. The light changing from white to gold to amber, to rose to the deep blue that is not quite night. Take in its time, giving the city a chance to settle into its evening character before the darkness makes everything its own. You're sitting at the window again. The street below has changed register. The working day traffic replaced by evening traffic. People moving without the urgency of business. The conversations more lateral, more lingering. You take the quinine. The bitterness is familiar now, almost comfortable, the way familiar things become comfortable even when they're not pleasant. The body's preference for the known over the novel. You think about the ward. You think about Teodoro, lying in the bed that was your shared bed for 3 weeks, his compositor's hands on the blanket, his eyes closed, the ink stain in his knuckles, working through whatever is working through him with the same patient precision he brings to everything. You think about La Française, whose name you never learned, who came on Thursday afternoons with her own quinine and argued in the corridor and made no production of any of it. You think about Father Damaso, sitting with the dying, not performing, not resolving, just staying. The radical simplicity of staying. You think about the frieze on the ceiling, 1475, the plastered line, the painted colour, the 5 centuries of eyes that have looked at it. The city outside your window has been here longer than almost anything you can name, has been burning and flooding and filling with people and emptying and refilling since before your nation, your language, your religion took their current forms. Every generation of people who have lived in Rome has believed for a while that their version of the city is the real one, the true Rome. And in a way, each of them was right. The city contains all its versions simultaneously. The ancient city is under the medieval city, which is under the Renaissance city, which is under this one. They're all there. They all happened. You happened here too. You're part of the accumulation now. Not grandly. Not in any way that will leave a record. You weren't an artist or a scholar or a politician. You were a plasterer from Viterbo who got the fever and came out the other side and is going back to work next week. But you were here. You lay in that bed. You looked at that ceiling. You heard that ward's specific nightly breathing, the coughing, the prayers in the dark. You were present for Vincenzo's composure and Luca Salvemini's death, and the young lay brother with the trembling tray. You carried all of it through. That's not nothing. The evening bells begin, not the dramatic announcement of a feast day. Just the ordinary evening bells, marking the end of the day's work, the beginning of the evening, the regular passage of time in a city that has been marking time this way for more than 1,000 years. You listen to them. They ring in sequence, one church, then another, then 3 or 4 simultaneously, then a deeper bell from somewhere north, then the high, sharp bell of the church on the corner of your street. Layers and overlaps, the sound spreading out across the rooftops, bouncing off the stone, filling the evening air with something that is specific to this city and no other. This particular argument of bells, this particular acoustic geography. Rome. You close your eyes and listen. Later. The room is dark. The last of the evening light gone an hour ago. The candle you lit after supper burned down to a stub, its small flame guttering now in the slight movement of air from the open window. You're lying on your back, not the hospital's. Straw, your own mattress, thin, but yours. Not the ward's ceiling with its frieze, your room's ceiling, plain whitewash plaster, nothing on it. Clean and empty and yours. The sounds of the city at night are different from the hospital's night sounds. Fuller, more varied. The tavern 2 streets away is audible. Not clearly, just a murmur and occasional laughter. The sound of people choosing to be somewhere rather than being there by necessity. Footsteps on the cobblestones below. Two people talking as they pass, their voices clear for a moment and then fade in. The sound of the city's nightly work continuing. Someone delivering something somewhere. The clop of a horse, a door opening and closing. And the bells, still, at intervals. You're warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You say this to yourself because Teodoro would say it probably. The compositor's habit of checking things for accuracy before proceeding. Warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You're here. You came back. Your hands lying flat on the blanket are beginning to remember what they're for. They still have the muscle memory of the plaster work, the specific pressure of the trowel, the spreading action of the arm, the gentle resistance of the wall. It'll be a few more days before the strength is fully back. But the knowledge is still there, in the hands themselves, waiting. You think about the ceiling in the Palazzo on the Via Giulia, where you were working before the fever came. The last section Salvatore wanted done by Friday. The Friday that turned out to be the Friday you couldn't stay upright on the scaffold. It's still there, probably, waiting to be finished. The plastered edge where you stopped, the line of your work ending mid-motion. Next week you'll go back. You'll climb the scaffold and find the place where you stopped, and you'll pick up the trowel and continue. The work is unfinished, so you'll finish it. That's what comes next. But that's next week. Right now there is only this, the room, the dark, the bells at intervals, the city breathing outside the window, the way it's been breathing for longer than memory, the way it'll keep breathing long after everyone in it tonight is gone, and replaced and gone again. You came here with a letter and 12 scudi and a pair of hands that knew their work. You still have 2 of those 3 things, and the third, the scudi, you'll earn back. The city took 3 weeks from you, but it gave something back too, something harder to name. The kind of knowledge that only comes from having been completely helpless and having gotten through it anyway. The knowledge that your body is stronger than you thought, or stubborn enough to look like strong. The knowledge that strangers will help you if you need it badly enough. That there are people who do the work of tending without keeping score. That composure is a thing you choose, not a thing you're given. That the walls around you, these walls, any walls, hold more history than you'll ever know, and that this is a comfort rather than a weight if you let it be. The candle goes out. The dark settles into itself, complete and soft. Outside, the Tiber running in the dark the way it always runs. Inside, your own breathing, which is just breathing now. Automatic, effortless, the way it's supposed to be. You don't have to manage it. You let it manage itself. And you let the thoughts slow. Let the last of the city's sounds soften at the edges. The bells, the footsteps, the far-off voices. Let them become texture rather than content. Sound without meaning. Presence without demand. Your body is heavier than it was an hour ago. This is the weight of actual rest. Not the fevered sleep you've been doing for 3 weeks. Not the vigilant half-sleep of the ward, but real sleep beginning. The kind that starts at the feet and moves upward, unhurried, claiming each part of you as it goes. Your feet first, already gone, your legs. The ache of walking today, the specific tiredness of legs unused for weeks and then walked for the first time. Let it dissolve. Let it be over. It was enough. You did enough today. Your hands, your plastering hands, your father's hands roughly. The hands that will go back to the scaffold next week and continue the work they were doing when the fever interrupted. Let them rest. Let them rest on the blanket, loose, open, nothing to grip. They've gripped enough today. They'll grip again tomorrow. Tonight they can simply be hands, hands at rest. Your chest, the place where the fever lived. Let it be just a chest now. A chest that rises and falls without effort, without management, without the memory of last week's labour. Just the simple, reliable fact of breathing. The ceiling above you is invisible in the dark, but you know what's on the other side of it. The night sky over Rome, the September sky, the stars that are there above the city's smoke and the cloud and the dark if you could see far enough. The same stars that were there in 1475 when someone painted the frieze. The same stars that Cicero looked at from this city when he wrote about the Campagna's fevers. The same stars that will be there long after the hospital and the palazzo on the Via Giulia and this particular room have all been replaced by something else. The stars don't know about the fever. The stars don't know about any of it. They're just there, continuing, patient beyond patience. Centuries will pass. The Rome you know will change past recognition. The ward at Santo Spirito will be demolished and rebuilt, its patients moved to new rooms with clean white beds and electric light, and medicines that actually understand what they're treating. The fever will finally be understood, a specific parasite, a specific carrier, a specific mechanism, and the mosquitoes in the Campagna will be eliminated, and the malaria will turn out to have been neither mal nor area, but something altogether more specific and conquerable than bad air. Thus, aqueducts will be rebuilt and water will flow through pipes to every household in the city, and people will wash their hands with water from a tap and not think once about where it came from. The Tiber will be walled and controlled. The city will grow past the hills, past the ancient ring, into a modern metropolitan spread that Teodoro couldn't imagine, that you couldn't imagine. But the frieze will still be there. In some room of some building on that bend of the Tiber, someone in the 15th century pressed pigment into plaster and made a line, and somewhere in the structure of what the city will become, the intention of that line, the desire to make something useful also beautiful, to put care into the walls people have to live with, that intention will persist. And somewhere in the city, always in every version of the city, there will be people doing the work of tending, not because it's glamorous, not because it's recognized, because there are people who need it and they are people who do it. And the bells will still ring, not the same bells, not these specific bells cast in these specific foundries, hung in these specific towers, but bells, Rome's bells, the city marking its own time the way it always has. You'll hear them in the morning. But morning's a long way away. Right now there is only the dark and the breathing and the slow, patient river. Let them carry you. You've done enough for today. You've done more than enough. The city has you. The night has you. Sleep has you. Go. Good night.